It's chaos.
It's a different type of Sunday scary.
It's your newest obsession.
It's Dirty Driving, a Formula One podcast.
We're the Hornsby sisters. I'm Katie.
And I'm Megan.
Yeah. Hello, everyone.
Hello. Welcome back.
Welcome back to another episode. This time, for our next guest, we have an exciting voice on the podcast. Megan, you want to give her the intro?
Absolutely. Today, we are beyond excited to have her on as a guest. We are inspired by her love of Formula One, her desire to elevate female voices, and creating thoughtful, engaging, and conversation-starting content about motorsport. I knew I was going to get that wrong. She is currently an intern with Race Service and most recently led the Longest Drive Challenge golf activation at the U.S. Grand Prix. She gave us fans so much content. I mean, we all saw the clips. Come on, Shaq. In addition to her role at Race Service, she is the founder of Formula One Nation and is an inspiring part of F1 TikTok. You must have seen her videos. Today, we are so excited to welcome Emma Elsbecker to the podcast.
Hey, y'all. Thank you so much for having me. I'm always so excited to work with some super awesome women in motorsports. So it's exactly how I want to finish my day.
We are so happy you're finishing your day with us.
Ended on a high note.
A very high note, yes, especially on a Monday. I don't know where you are right now, but it's very cold where I am, Megan.
I'm in LA and it's freezing for LA. Everybody at work was triple sweatshirt layered.
Oh my gosh.
Brutal.
Yeah, because you guys don't own coats out there.
Well, so I go to school in New Hampshire, but all of my winter clothing is in storage. So I'm just rolling up with a sweatshirt and that's all that I have. My heavy winter coats are packed away.
So wait, what is cold in LA? Is it 40?
No, so this is, my New Hampshire friends are going to kill me for saying this. Because in New Hampshire, 50 degrees is sweatshirts and shorts. But here, 50 degrees is 5 layers. But it's 50 degrees and raining. So
the rain.
I will admit, it's pretty miserable out. But for East Coast, it's not that bad.
You must have it's such a transition from Northeast to California and the what they consider cold and what they consider cold weather clothing.
Yes, yeah.
Well, we are very happy to have you here, and we're very happy that you're not outside in the rain. We start all of our conversations, all of our interviews off with beginning with what started your love of Formula One or motorsport. Take it as you want.
Yeah, I think it's kind of a long patchwork journey. My first memory of motorsport was watching NASCAR and the Indy 500, so NASCAR and IndyCar with my dad growing up. For me, it was more of a bonding thing with him. I never got super into the drivers or the races, but I always just knew a fun time with dad was sitting there on the couch and watching the race. It was a bonding thing. And then as I got older, I kind of shifted away from sports, was focused on government, thought that's what I wanted to work in. COVID-19 hit. I was burnt out on government and realized that's a really bad sign. I don't think this is the industry for me to work in. And there was a confluence of a couple events that kind of brought me back to motorsports. So in sports, generally, my hometown team, the Phoenix Suns, were on an undefeated record in the NBA playoff bubble. And I started to think, what is the statistical chance that would happen? So that was my first tap into sports analytics. Drive to Survive was going crazy on Netflix, and it reignited that kind of dormant motorsport interest that I always had. And so the confluence of those two things and realizing that I didn't want to work in government came together to push me into motorsport. And I have just been head over heels 24/7 in the community for about 2.5 years now, but definitely have my roots in watching NASCAR with my dad.
So they can't claim that you're a Drive to Survive fan then. You've had roots long before
I kind of embrace it. I'm yeah, I have roots before it, but I hate people that use DTS as I made so many videos about DTS fans. So I'm hey, if you want to call me a DTS fan, cool. I like the show. My thesis is literally the Drive to Survive effect. So I will never rebuff the label DTS fan. It's so important in marketing. I had very high level conversation, serious conversations in the paddock with people who were thank God for Drive to Survive. So it just makes me laugh anytime haters on TikTok are F DTS fans. And like, you can say that, and then all of like F1 marketing is so grateful that it exists. So like, I just think it's funny to me. That contrast is insane.
It's so important to the community. I fully believe that it is revolutionize the way sports documentaries happen.
100%.
Because now it is Netflix is there. They don't know what the story of the documentary is going to be, because they're in the they're living it, and then they decide the story after it.
Yeah.
As opposed to watching a documentary about a famous baseball game from 4 years ago, they don't know what the end is going to look like. They have no idea what they're going to clip together to make a conversation, an engaging piece. And I think it really, I mean, Katie and I are Drive to Survive fans. I fully embrace it, because there was no mechanism for engaging fans in it. It's a hard sport to understand.
Okay, I always say that a hard sport like that needs two things: a hook to get people invested, which is rarely the sport itself. It's normally the people or the drama, and a means for understanding the sport. So when you think about a sport like golf or tennis, something that is kind of more highbrow that you get grandfathered into watching, if you don't have somebody that leads you into that conversation, it's so rare for you to become a later in life fan. F1 recognized that. They have a documentary. Box to Box Films is now doing the same thing with golf and tennis, because they are both sports that you need to be grandfathered into if you don't already have an understanding or somebody to sit there and explain it to you.
Not only that, but it gave the sport itself a personality. It gave us that inside look into who the drivers really are, how they talk to each other, how they communicate with their cousins who are also their managers. It has given us such now I know who these drivers are. Now I know what they represent. And I can be a fan of them, not just because of their talents on track, but because of who they are as humans as well.
Yeah. And that's something that I talk about a lot. And not everybody has equal expectations of athletes that they support. I think partially I grew up with a sister who played soccer in college. She has a couple of friends who are professional soccer players. Her husband, all of his friends are NFL players. So I'm kind of surrounded in this like professional athletics world a little bit. And I think because I grew up always understanding those athletes to be very normal people, I have this kind of higher burden or higher expectation of athletes that I support, which is I want to somewhat know their kind of political and social platforms. DTS gave us a view into that, but that's why on my account, I do talk about their politics or whether or not they've uplifted a social cause, because I personally believe if I'm going to fully throw my support behind a driver, I want to do it knowing more about them. And especially after DTS came out, I think the drivers have kind of willingly entered into an era where they just are going to be open and honest with fans, and they have to share some of these things, whether wrong or right. It's just the reality of the sport now.
So the biggest thing about F1 is I've realized as I've brought more people into it is that if you watch the press conferences, if you take the time to follow the drivers' accounts, follow the TikToks, you immediately understand them, or you can now like empathize with them as humans. They are not just a car that is going fast. Whenever I introduce someone to the sport and I just show them, like I just throw on the race, they don't understand. They don't realize that isn't in fact a human making those decisions. And so Drive to Survive, all of them being on social media, all of them sharing their political views, their social views, all of the things that they support, seeing their families, what if they want that or not, that's a personal choice. But I think all of that, and then being able to see them in a press conference, you now get the full picture of who they are as an athlete and as a person. Whereas originally, if you weren't brought into it by like a parent, your parent wasn't telling you, oh, have you heard about Ayrton Senna? Have you heard about Michael Schumacher? Yep. Like my parents would have never told me those stories about them. Niki Lauda, James Hunt, they would have never told me those stories because they didn't grow up in a household that grew those stories. So Drive to Survive almost gave us that like infusion of human in a sport that feels very inhuman when you're just watching it on TV.
Yeah. I think like the living testament to that is my mom, who is like the most sport hating, car hating person. She like sat down when I was starting to work with race service and was like, I want to understand what you're doing. Let's watch Drive to Survive. And I had begged her for months to watch Drive to Survive. And she always was just like, Emma, you know, cars aren't my thing. And then this was her like, this is her love language, was like, let's watch DTS. I want to understand your world. We only got through 2 episodes. But the episodes that we watched were enough for her to be like, Alex Albon's my guy. I like Alex Albon. She's a therapist. So she was like, her therapist heart was bleeding for Alex. And now she like is a massive Alex fan. Like I texted her when Alex had appendicitis and she was like, oh my God, is he okay? Is he going to keep racing? Does he have his seat? And like that came because she watched 2 hours of Alex on Drive to Survive. And that was enough for her to have a more human connection to the sport rather than, like you said, Megan, just cars driving fast.
And that is the point that I don't think, and this is definitely something I want to dive into, because now there's this world of like the older generation of fans and like the newer Drive to Survive fans. Like I truly think that that's what people in the older generation don't understand about the Drive to Survive fans. It wasn't about, for a lot of us, it wasn't about the drama. It wasn't about the supposed, you know, conflicts or enemies in the paddock, and it wasn't about any of that. It was putting a name and a face and a personality and seeing the story. I mean, we watch Esteban Ocon kind of in a weird way, like grow up over the 4 seasons.
Yeah.
We see Alex Albon kind of grow up over the 4 seasons. I think we're going to see Yuki grow up in next season a little bit from last season. So other than like that dichotomy of like, you know, the newer and younger generation of fans, like what is it like to be a creator and putting yourself out there and like having to interact with fans that are like calling you out for being a DTS fan?
It's always interesting, and I've spoken about this a lot, but I think the DTS fan term is very layered, and it's very misogynistic at its core, and it's tied back to long historical divides between genders, really. Right? So DTS originated as a means to bring new fans to the sport, like we spoke about. Drive to Survive fans tended to be more focused on, let's say, the human contact, the personal background of the drivers, and that was looked down upon. That was considered like a lesser than fan. And along with this wave of new fans, it brought more vocal female fans in. And so more and more, even though it wasn't just female fans, the term DTS fan became a way to say uneducated, a dumb fan, essentially. That became unequally used for women. And I always say on TikTok, it's not just used against women. I acknowledge that, but I guarantee you it is used against women more than men. So now it has evolved from this term that just means that you came from a Netflix show to you came from a Netflix show. You don't understand F1. You're here for the drivers. You're an uneducated fan. You're not really worth being in the sport, and you're more likely to be a woman. So there's like this really long sequential that I could do like a 2-hour long podcast on how we got there. Half my thesis is like how this term has evolved and how teams have adopted it, how it's been ingrained within the sport. But I think the core of it is it's used to intimidate and invalidate female content creators. All creators technically, but predominantly female content creators. And there's a couple ways that I've approached it throughout my time on TikTok. At first, I was really defensive and I was like, I'm not a DTS fan. I have more of a background in the sport. I do like more complicated analysis. I'm writing a thesis about F1. And then I kind of had this like personal come to Jesus moment where I was like, why am I rejecting this term? I like the show. It's being used against me when it's something that I could just embrace and try to break the stereotype associated with the term. So now when I see DTS fan, I kind of laugh. I screenshot it because I've already spoken with my thesis advisor. I want the whole first page of my thesis to be screenshots of people on TikTok calling me a Drive to Survive fan. Like it's become a bit in my life. So I'm just like, I've accepted it. I've indoctrinated into it. And I think the more that you can laugh at those trolls that call you uneducated, the more that you can kind of have fun on TikTok and embrace it and recognize that, yeah, occasionally I'll make a mistake, but to a broad extent, I have to trust what I'm saying. Because I think that there's this burden or this indifference in knowledge where, and I'm sure people are going to comment on this podcast and say that like not everything is gendered, but I think the reality as a female content creator is most things feel gendered, which is male content creators are presumed to know what they're talking about. They make a mistake. That's exactly what it was, a mistake. If a female content creator says something wrong, it's because she's an idiot and she never knew what she was talking about. And it's a result of her knowledge, not a mistake, right? It's this difference in like how much room we give somebody to kind of mess up. And so whenever I make a mistake and somebody comes at me super viciously, I just kind of have to take that step back internally and understand that they have not seen the hundreds of conversations that I've had about F1 with other people, with teams, with people at work, and just kind of internally shore up that I'm correct, or I'm correct at the core of what I was trying to communicate. But again, sometimes you just have to laugh at it. Like I made a video a long time ago talking about the theoretical Porsche Red Bull deal. I was never around somebody that owned a Porsche in my life. I did not grow up with family that drove Porsches. And when I heard of the brand Porsche, I heard it pronounced as Porsche. So
that's how most Americans pronounce it.
Yeah, so I pronounced it as Porsche in my TikTok, and I'm not like 30 comments, predominantly from men, that were like, "You're an idiot, it's Porsche." And I was like, "Cool, my bad." Car community really sides with it being Porsche. I made a video a week later, called it Porsche. 30 comments saying, "It's Porsche, you idiot." And then I get to race service where we work with Porsche multiple times a year. My roommate owns a Porsche. He's a Porsche car collector. And every single person at work pronounces it differently. Every single person. And that was kind of this moment of like, oh, you can never be correct enough for people on TikTok. Like you can never be knowledgeable enough. You can never be right enough. So just kind of like, to borrow Daniel's FEA, like I'm just not going to care. Like I'm going to stop triple checking everything I say because A, most male content creators don't. And B, if I'm wrong, it's TikTok. It's not the end of the world.
It's so interesting because I remember back to when we started the podcast. So, we become Drive to Survive fans. We start watching races. I immediately gravitate to start watching FP1, FP2, FP3 qualies, press conferences. I'm watching the tech talks. I'm watching old races. I'm watching every video I can on YouTube because it was just like a vortex, it grabbed you as a fan, and just like next thing you know, it's like 2 a.m. It's COVID life, and I've watched 100 videos on YouTube about aerodynamics. But I felt like I had to do 10 times more of that when we started the podcast for that fear, because I knew, I was like, I don't know if I consciously knew it, but subconsciously I was like, I need to establish that we know what we're talking about quickly, so that people don't just discount my opinion as, well, she doesn't really know that much about this, or she doesn't remember this one race back in 2014. I'm like, no, does anybody, like, if it was an unmemorable moment, what? No, that's not realistic. And no, and more importantly, no one would ask a male F1 content creator, do you know who won the 2015 blah, 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 blah? That isn't a question. But for me, it was assumed we were going to get asked those questions. Yeah.
Oh, for sure. I remember I hadn't even made my blog yet. I was hanging out at one of my friends' apartments. It was my two friends who kind of like forced me to start the TikTok, and their roommate who came up to me and was like, we were just talking about the blog. He was an F1 fan, and he started quizzing me. And I remember walking away from that conversation and thinking, you've heard me sit here for weeks now talking about the blog that I'm creating. You've seen me spend hundreds of hours writing this blog, writing information about every circuit, about every driver, about every team. And yet you're still knowledge checking me? Because that's what it feels like, right? It's this, do you know enough? You say you're a fan, but are you really a fan? And it never even occurred to me to try to gauge how much of a fan he ever was by asking him questions. And even with the guys at work now, luckily it's gotten to the point where we will have, let's say, like an outside potential client come in, often who works in Formula One. They tend to be male. And we will kick up conversations about F1. Somebody might ask a question, and it's never directly pointed towards me. especially if it's from an outside contractor. I'm used to it. It's not a big deal. But I've luckily gotten to a point with my coworkers where they almost always defer it to me. They're like, oh, like that's an Emma question. Like, we don't know that much about F1. That's an Emma question. But that is such a rare thing to find, is like men who recognize and who will trust your intelligence. I think there's always just this kind of underlying little bit of mistrust about like, okay, you're a fan. How much of a fan are you? And how far
really
back can I possibly quiz you? Which, I mean, it's like with the Pit Stop Boys, right? They had their podcast for months and they didn't know things for months. And there should be a space for that. There should be a podcast that's just new fans learning F1. But for months, it was really funny when they wouldn't know stuff and when they were learning stuff. And how long it took for it to get to a point for people to call it out and say, hey, just flagging this, women could never get away with this, compared to, I made a video about Porsche and their historical roots in racing. And I was talking about their history in F1 because they've had 2 times that they entered F1 as a team and then as an engine and chassis supplier, but not as a team themselves. I excluded when they were just a supplier. And I got a comment from a guy that was like, you don't know anything about this. You forgot the time that they were a supplier. I was like,
you're like,
it's a 60-second video. We were talking about their history as a team. I spoke about them as a team. I'm sorry I wasn't alive in 1965 and didn't think that was like the most important thing to include in this video. But it's just, it will never fail to like shock me the amount of knowledge that people expect that we need to have to be deemed a knowledgeable fan. Especially when you really watch things like Sky Sports and Canal Plus in detail, and you like, there's people on that show who don't know those details.
No.
Which is fair game, like totally fair. But the burden tends to be on younger women because we are not stereotypically represented in the sport to prove that we actually do have a place. And that's by this knowledge testing, which is so outdated, so steeped in old misogyny, and hopefully will die out soon.
Well, it's just unfortunate that it feels like, and this is my concern, is because I never want a new female fan, a new young female fan, to join Twitter and decide that that's where they want to learn some things about
not
F1.
The place to start
Twitter.
Like, don't enter the F1
there.
community through Twitter. Don't do it.
Until you are like 4 races in and you've already decided that you like the sport, don't go on F1 Twitter, because it is such a hateful community that you look at it and you say, how can I love a community so much that has so much hate inside of it? And I think as a content creator, I mean, for us, I can speak for Katie and I can't speak for you. For us, it's what can we do to bring just a little bit of knowledge, a little bit of happiness? Like, let's talk about pop culture, but let's also talk about tire management. Let's just engage in this activity we like. And hopefully the more people that are positive, we can, I mean, we're never going to overthrow F1 Twitter, but we can at least create an environment where new fans feel like it is positive.
100%. And it's this interesting dichotomy that you see having been in the paddock for a race is just how much more amped up fans are kind of with some of these hatreds compared to guys who I've been working with, who have been in the F1 world for years, who know Max and know Lewis and are like really nonchalant about it. And are like, they're both guys. They happen to drive for rival teams. They contested a championship against each other, but they're both men racing cars. And like, that's all that it is. And then you get on TikTok and it's like the civil war of Formula One.
It is.
It's like you have too much time and you are too invested in these people. I will never stake my opinion, who I am, my account on a driver, because they are fallible people just like we are. And so to like stake your claim is like, I am a Lewis fan or a Max fan until I die. And if you are the opposing team, you deserve nothing. Like, you never know what the driver could do. They're a person just like we are a person. And so to put them on this heroic pedestal, it isn't fair to them. And it's a bad decision as a fan. And it just creates this infighting which is, it's stupid. And it's a waste of time when there's so many other things that we could be doing in the sport.
There's so much more positivity. Go ahead, Katie. Sorry.
It keeps people from thinking that they can evolve with the sport. So when I first started, were there drivers that I didn't like as much as the other drivers? Yes. Did I ever spew hateful comments about them? No. I don't have time nor the energy to do so. But this whole idea of, oh, I can only be a Max fan or I can only be a Lewis fan, it keeps from that evolution of, hey, when I first started, was Esteban Ocon my favorite person? No. Now do I call him the most underrated driver on the grid? Yes. Yeah. Because my respect, as I've learned, as he has grown up through Drive to Survive, that we've been able to see, like we mentioned earlier, as he has grown as a driver on the grid, I have come to appreciate him more. So for me to then choose one driver to stake my claim, that means the other 19 drivers are not as great. And that's not right. All 20 of them deserve to be there. All 20 of them have worked hard to be there. And all 20 of them should be respected as the top drivers in the top class of motorsport. Yeah. You don't have to like them, but you don't have to disrespect them.
Yeah, and like you have to have that looseness almost in how tight you hold to your fandom. And again, in recognition that these people are human. Like, I'm a Pierre fan, and right now I'm a slightly disappointed Pierre. Not a slight. I'm a disappointed Pierre fan because he made some uneducated comments about grid girls. Does that mean I'm not a Pierre fan? No. I am still mostly a fan of him. I'm hoping he has some more contextual awareness about the value of his platform and how far his words carry. And he thinks about that more when he chooses to speak about particularly women in motorsport. But if I had put in, stake in the ground, I'm a Pierre Gasly fan until I die, and then he did this, like what value does that give me in relation to the sport? And I think that is what makes people live and die by the sport in a way where they fall out of love and they have to back off, is when we can't recognize that the people behind it and the racing that they do is all fallible and it's all going to change. And there are times when it's going to be really messed up and there's times when it's going to be great. Then how can you stay a long-term committed fan? Like you have to give the sport and the people in the sport the room to breathe and to grow. And that's why when I make videos and people always are rushing and saying that's cancel culture, that was from a long time ago or they could have grown. It's never that I don't want them to grow. It's that I think a lot of times these men don't have people calling them on these things. So it's not cancel culture. It's more of like a flag for re-education of, I want you to grow. I want the sport to get better. I want the sport to have 20 drivers who I like. I want to like all of the drivers. But, that can't happen if we hold tightly to our drivers and protect them and act like they are these perfect little humans, when in reality, just like you or I, they've liked a stupid tweet before. It's on a much bigger platform and they're going to get a much bigger reaction to it. But I think we have to back off. We have to realize that they're human. And when you go on something like F1 Twitter, I almost visualize this grid as like all the drivers spread out on a sliding scale, and they're all separated from each other. And it's like Max and Lewis at one end, and they are all very different people and very big, different personalities. And then you get closer to them and you interact more with them, and they become so much more condensed as they're so much more similar than you thought. And yes, they're all different people, but it's not like you walk into the paddock and Lewis Hamilton is like flipping off Red Bull as he walks by. Like it's we spoke about everything is more amplified on social media. And then you get there and you realize let's say 2,000 people who work for a team, they all travel together every other weekend. They all go out together. They all eat together. They spend years together. There's no way that they hate each other as much as F1 fans hate each other. And if we could just take a step back and recognize that it could be so much more mellow and so much more enjoyable, like that's how the teams do it, I think we'd have a much happier fan base.
Could not agree more, because I just, all of the hatred and all of the you versus us and them versus them all stems from the fans. It's all these like very like overhyped, like we must defend our drive. Like it's all the fans. it is, and not all the fans, what I'm saying is that sounded probably incorrect, but I meant like that stems from fans. Like that rhetoric is all created by fans. Not all fans agree with that rhetoric, but it is rhetoric that we've created, or not we, but like fans have created, because they believe that I have to choose one and I have to defend one. Mm-hmm. And it's almost like controversial to like too many drivers.
Oh,
yeah.
I am the queen of when people ask me who my favorite driver is, I say, whichever one hasn't pissed me off this week.
Yeah.
Because, again, they're humans. They make mistakes. They make errors, whether it's on track, off track, whatever it is. I like all of them for different reasons. And the one who's my favorite in the moment is the one who hasn't done anything to bother me this week. And it's allowed to ebb and flow and up and change. And
that doesn't mean that you're less dedicated or more educated. No. It actually means that you have a much broader perspective and you love the sport. And you like the drivers, but you love the overarching sport.
And it's actually okay to like the sport and criticize the sport, just like it is okay to like a driver and criticize a driver. There is this just like hard line that's been established of everything is black or it's white. Everything is blue or it's green, red or yellow. Like there is no gray, orange, like that's not allowed. You're not allowed to muddy the water by having like complex feelings about a situation. Just like you were saying with Pierre, we can be very upset with what Pierre said about Grid Girls, just like I was very upset about what Daniel Ricciardo said about being politically engaged in Jeddah. Yep. I can have these feelings of disappointment, but I can still support the driver and hope that with enough knowledge, more engagement by them in society, reading articles, being more aware, having tough conversations, they can grow as well. Because, I mean, we all have to remember, like, they're all young too, other than like Fernando Alonso.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm still learning. We've all, you said, liked a tweet we maybe shouldn't have liked, or said something and been like, maybe I shouldn't have said it that way, or I have a problem with what I said. But it's about growing and learning and being engaged and having the tough conversations. And I don't know if those conversations, specifically the hard ones, are the ones that are happening.
No, and I think it's the finding the balance of recognizing that the drivers are young, they're learning, they're going to make mistakes, and how do we flag times that they've messed up without canceling. And that's something that I walk that line on my channel every day. And there are people who will always comment on the videos that I make specifically about like maybe a driver's unintentionally sexist remarks, who are like, you're giving them no room to grow. And it's that black and white that we spoke about, of this lack of understanding that I can call out Checo for something that he said and still hope and advocate for him to learn and be more vocal about the issue. Like me disliking something that a driver did doesn't mean that they're like in my dirty books and can never come back. Because then, frankly, I wouldn't like any driver.
Correct.
Like I said,
you would have a burn book.
Exactly. I have a probably higher than some people social barrier or benchmark that I would like drivers to meet. I actively want drivers to recognize their personal platform and use it to promote people who are underrepresented in the sport. Most drivers won't do this, and I recognize that. And I can still be a fan of them. The drivers who I love are the ones who use that platform. The drivers who I may be a little bit disappointed in are the ones who are saying more uneducated things, but that's a spectrum, right? Like that's not, you are always going to be an angel and I will always hate you. And I think people just sometimes don't recognize how multifaceted our relationships or our views of a driver and the sport can be. Like it's impossible to love a sport when you are so easily disappointed by it. And that's not always great. Like we want to have high expectations of a sport, but you don't want them to be so high where you're expecting it to be perfect. I think you need to be in that sweet spot of you have some kind of like conditions. It's the same thing in a relationship. You have conditions that you want somebody to meet. You have expectations, but you can't expect them to be 100% all of the time. That's a recipe for disaster. That's a recipe for like a quick fire burnout love versus one that's more long lasting of a passion of, I'm going to push you and advocate for you to get better because I love you. Like I'm going to be open to the sport. I'm going to love F1 and I'm going to call out sexist things because I want to love it for a really long time. So,
well,
yeah.
I mean, we all would have walked away from F1 if we couldn't handle the sport letting us down lately.
Exactly.
Like none of us would have gotten past the end of last year if we didn't recognize it. But I do think that is an important thing to note for like newer fans to the sport, is that I can't actually think of a sport in the United States, because that's where we are, where there hasn't been some controversy, some questioning of the league, some issues with how the league has handled an incident, issues with specific players and what they've been allowed to get away with versus what they've not been allowed to get away with. And we expect that. Like, I understand that the NFL is problematic, but I still watch football and I still engage in the conversations around football, and specifically accounts that uplift aspects of football that are positive. So it's the same thing. And I wonder if that's going to, fans will have to wrestle with that. I mean, I know they're wrestling with that over kind of the most recent stuff out of the FAA, but as they grow with the sport, I mean, like, this will not be the only season that people have questions about. And last season will not be the only season that people have questions about.
Yes. I was talking with some of the guys that I work with who have been friends with drivers or have been in the sport for as long, if not longer, than I've been alive. And I was kind of talking about, trying to think of the right way to frame this, of a certain situation or team dynamic where I was like, this is really wrong. This feels rigged. Like, how is this the case? And he just kind of shrugged his shoulders. He was like, this was always the case. Like, every season, there is a run of DNFs where you're like, why is one car DNFing 8 times and the other car is DNFing twice? Like, that controversy will always be there. And I think as new waves of fans come in, every time it's going to feel new and every time it's going to feel worse than the last. And I think that's just recency bias. Yeah. That's us not having the broader context that, like, in my dad's generation, or even, you go back to like Spygate with Fernando, like it's always been there. And I'm sure when the whole Fernando situation happened, it was earth shattering. It was like, how is F1 going to continue? And it did. The issue is, like, there is the strong base of fans who will always love the sport, who will always want it to grow, who will always recognize that it's fallible, who will stick by it. And I think that is the new wave of fans will get there. We just kind of have to settle in those turbulent waters of realizing this will always be happening. And recency bias makes it feel like it's a lot worse for us when it's real. It's just what is directly in front of us. It's always going to seem bigger. It's always going to seem more dangerous.
I think there are 2 really important things that I wish, out of this conversation that we just had, that I wish I could share with everyone who's a fan of F1. And that's, you have to respect that we are always going to be learning. The sport is always going to be changing. There's always going to be something more to learn. I have yet to meet someone in the year and change that we've been doing this podcast who knows every little facet about every little thing that there is in Formula One. I'm sorry, but it's physically impossible to be a champion in the drama, in the technical, in the engineering, in all of it. You can't. There's so much, and that's why we have to respect and love this sport so much. And then the other part of it is that you're allowed to feel multiple emotions about it. I don't have to feel one emotion and settle on that emotion. I'm allowed to be a multifaceted human and feel the influx of happiness and the influx of sadness when, things don't really go the way that they should have gone. But at the end of the day, it's human error. We all make errors every day. And like, those are the 2 things that if we could impose those on, F1 TikTok or Twitter or even Instagram sometimes, I think we would all learn to respect and love each other a little bit more, understanding that, there's always something to learn and there's always another emotion that I can feel.
Yeah. And can we just say, like, how boring would that be to know everything that there is to know? Like, how boring would that be to watch TikTok and be like,
I know
that was a waste of time. I knew everything in that episode. I always want to be learning stuff. I always want somebody to be like, hey, let me explain to you how this engine works. Like, we had next gen NASCARs in the garage, and I had somebody get to talk me through how the new car worked. And it's like, how boring would it be if I just was like, nope, I know everything.
I don't need to listen here. It isn't realistic. It's not feasible, but it also would make life pretty boring. Like, at that point, like, why even be interested in the sport? You know everything. Like, you've achieved.
Exactly.
Like, you've gotten gold in knowledge. Move on to the next sport to get gold in knowledge.
Yeah.
This podcast is brought to you by Racing Thread, Formula One clothing for any occasion.
Their clothing features subtle, evocative, embroidered designs for your favorite F1 moments.
From Ricardo's Monza shoey to Sebastian's Australian scooter ride.
From Lewis's Brazilian comeback to Carlando's round of golf.
Whether you're out to dinner with friends, watching the race at home, or cheering in the grandstands,
gone are the embarrassing sponsor logos. Instead, Racing Thread is F1 clothing you are comfortable wearing anywhere.
Right now, Dirty Driving listeners can get 15% off Racing Thread's entire range of t-shirts, sweatshirts, and polos using the code Dirty Driving.
That's Dirty Driving, all capitals, no spaces, for 15% off their entire clothing range.
Head over to racingthread.com to shop F1 racewear for anywhere.
Okay, so I know we had kind of talked about this a little bit, and we've kind of hinted at some of these things, but so you decided to create a blog, Formula One Nation, and then you decided to take that blog and move into TikTok.
Mm-hmm.
So I think let's start with Formula One Nation. Like, what, I know you mentioned your friends really pushed you into doing it, but what was like the initial, how did you go on the journey to decide, like, yeah, my friends want me to do this, but no, I really want to be someone creating F1 content?
Yeah. So I feel like people don't believe me when I say this. I'm very uncomfortable in front of a camera. Like, my
I'm so glad.
instinct was never like, let me make a social media account. It was, let me make a blog and begrudgingly put my photo on the blog. But my roots in that is I was sitting in a sports analytics class. We had an alumni come into the class, and he spoke about how he had started a hockey blog doing hockey analytics, and he maintained that all throughout his like non-hockey jobs. And that helped him get a job in hockey after, like, let's say 6 years in regular consulting, was kind of having this proof of concept, having this passion project that when he wanted to move industries, he could show I have the work experience and the skills in my real jobs, and that I have the passion through this blog that I've maintained. So that was kind of my first entry into, okay, maybe this is how I can give myself more ethos and more credibility when I'm applying for jobs, is by starting this blog. I thought it'd be super easy, super quick. And then it took me 2 months to build up the website, because it was very important to me that the blog was primarily beginner friendly. So I had every circuit for the season, every driver, and I wanted somebody to be able to click through and feel like they could have a decently educated conversation about F1. I spent like 2 weeks creating like an F1 vocabulary. So it ended up being about a 2-month long project. At the end of it, my friends, Sud and Mac, who will be excited that they got a shout out on this podcast, I was like, do I need to put a photo of myself on the website? Like, what does it matter? And they were like, yes, you have to at least put a photo of your face for people to be like, okay, this is Emma. Cool. Like, name to face, that's Emma. And then they sat me down and they were like, to be successful, you really should make a TikTok for this. And I was like, hell no, never happening. I'm so awkward. I'm so uncomfortable in front of a camera. I don't want to make TikToks. And they just they kind of would nudge it every couple of weeks. And then when I was starting the blog, I reached out to a couple people who I had already been following on my personal TikTok that were F1 TikTokers. Just as they're like, will you look at my blog before it goes live? Like, will you give me advice? One person responded. It's Michaela, or She Loves F1. We're both from Phoenix. She responded and was like, your blog is amazing. And I kind of on a whim was like, can I do a Zoom call with you? Like, I want to learn more about your path in this sport. I want to learn more about your perspective. And it was on that call that I said, I'm not super comfortable in front of a camera. And I think I've missed the boat. Like, I think F1 TikTok is full. Like, all the niches that need to be covered, that's done. And she just kind of grounded into me. She was like, no, it's not. Like, it needs you. It needs other people. But like, if there's room for you, there's space for you, just go do it. And the biggest thing that she told me, she was like, you can't wait for the perfect video or the perfect moment. You just have to post. Like, you just have to get out there and you just have to be consistent and do it. And so I kind of reached a point. It was after the first race of the season, the Australia race, where I was like, okay, I'm going to do it. I'm going to make a TikTok. And I remember the first 5 got 200 views. And I was pumped. I was so jazzed. I bought a ring light to have better lighting. And I was starting to get into it a little bit. And then I was walking to class and I posted a TikTok and I looked and it was 200. And I refreshed and it was 300. And I refreshed and it was 400. And that was major. That was unheard of. And I texted my friend Mac and I was like, Mac, it's happening. My first video is going viral. And I was sitting at his apartment and we watched as it hit I think it hit 2,000 total, which is funny now because that's a normal video. But it was this moment of okay, this is how it works. This organic posting, this frequent posting, the community will find you. Mm-hmm. If you just strive to make authentic content that you want to be seeing in the space and be patient, then it will come. Whatever if you build it, they will come. And I've never really gotten more comfortable with it. It still is weird. I still, it's a bit at work. My boss, Jacob, will pull up my TikTok and full volume will play my TikTok videos. And I get nauseous, the hair on the back of my arms. I have to leave the room. It makes me so uncomfortable. But it was really just this confluence of people being like, Emma, you just have to do it. You want to talk about this. You can talk about it on a blog just fine, but you want to interact with people, just go make your TikTok. And so it was kind of this jump into very uncomfortable, very unknown territory. And again, it hasn't necessarily gotten easier. I remember the first time that I watched somebody that I go to school with, I walked past them and they were looking down at their phone and I could hear, they didn't have speakers in or headphones in, I could hear my video playing and I wanted to run and hide. It's getting over those road bumps of knowing that people that watch the content and that they may think it's dumb. And then just getting to a point where you're cool, I have people that think it's cool. I have a community that's interested and I'm just going to try to put blinders on and accept that this is real and that there are some people that are interested and just own it authentically. Because it doesn't necessarily get easier. You get more used to it.
It definitely doesn't get easier. Whenever anybody asks about how do you do this podcast, I'm no, the 10 minutes before I sit down to record this, no matter how many we have done, I feel so nauseous. And I think,
oh my God, yeah.
A lot of it comes to go back to the conversation we were having earlier is I am so fearful that I will say the wrong thing and I will make a mistake. I'll call Lewis an 8-time world champion, the Brazilian, the Brazilian, in his presentation of his honorary citizenship did. To me, that is nausea inducing. So I have to sit here and I have to calm myself down. And then I always get to a point 8 minutes in where I'm people like this. People like this. People ask us for more content. People want to interact with us. People want to come on the podcast. People want to talk about Formula One to us. But it is that 10-minute freak out that I don't think will ever go away.
It's the imposter syndrome. It's the what am I doing? Thinking that I have the right to speak on this. And again, that will never go away. Nope. That will never feel less weird. But I think it's just almost putting yourself in this locked in mindset of I can't focus on the fact that there are like people watching this and thinking that it's crazy. I have to focus on the people that are genuinely interested in what I have to say. And I feel like a turning point moment for me was the first video that I had. It reached like 400,000 views, was when that Little Miss meme trend was going on. And NASCAR posted a great one that was like Little Miss future pit crew, Little Miss race engineer, like very much so action items, like where women were getting involved with racing. And then McLaren posted one that was like Little Miss DTS fan and Little Miss wakes up at 5 a.m. to watch the race. It was all about watching. And I made a video. I remember I was like, no makeup on, just out of the shower, like hiding my face. I was like, these are very small moments of like where we should just be conscious of our wording. Like this is where NASCAR got it right and McLaren got it wrong. And it blew up. And that was the first time that I ever had that many hateful comments where I was like, did I say something so wrong? Like, was I so off base that I just totally like swing and miss? And then I had to take a step back and look at the likes and look at the other comments and realizing, okay, sure, there's, I don't know, 200 really angry commenters, and then there's 20,000 people who liked it. And that'll never make the loud haters not be loud haters, but it's just a little bit of like what we're doing is right. Like there are some people that are interested in it. And they may be silent, but that doesn't mean that they aren't there. And then I think anytime you have supporters that aren't silent, it is such like a whiplash, shocking moment. I will never be used to it. Like I met somebody in Austin where I went to introduce myself to them and they were like, "Oh, I know who you are." And I first I was like, "Oh my God, who are you? Like, how do you know who I am?" She was like, no, like I always watch your videos. I was like, me? Like you're watching my videos, and it doesn't happen a lot. Like I'm a super small creator. I'm like at the bottom of the totem pole. But anytime that happens too, I just think it's like this gut check of, okay, this is why we're doing it. Because there are women who are actively seeking out other people in the space to validate them and to say, you know, yes, there are other people that think this, that give them the inspiration to make it counts.
That is one of my questions for you was what's your advice? But I feel like that is the advice right there, is that there are people who want this community. So if you have any desire to be a content creator, regardless of what it is, if you want to just have a really awesome Instagram account, if you want to have a really awesome TikTok and start, I feel like there's new F1 TikTokers out every day. And I love it because there is always room in the space for creators. Yeah. Michaela is completely right.
Yes. The two pieces of advice that I've like heard and given that always stick with me. The first one is don't shrink yourself to be more palatable to people who don't want you in that space. And that has a lot of meanings for particularly women in motorsports. But the things that I catch myself on every day is like, don't be less feminine because you just work around men. Don't be quiet when somebody makes a sexist joke because you just want to fit in more. Like if you're in the right space, you can fully authentically be yourself and they will make space and make room for you. Like I'm incredibly lucky at race service that I came in and just was like, this is me. And I'm going to wear cowboy boots and a dress to work. And I'm going to talk about women in motorsports all the time. And they were like, cool, this is new, but we have space for this. Like we want Emma here. And if this is full Emma, we want full Emma. And then let's see, it was don't shrink yourself to be more palatable. I'm like, don't pick up the ladder behind you. That's the other one. When you break that glass ceiling, when you make it in, don't pick up the ladder and walk away because there's somebody at the bottom of the ladder waiting for a hands up. And so it's like, cool, you made it. You made your TikTok account. Turn around and focus on who you can help with that entry point. And it's really easy to get kind of jealous and protective and think like it took me so much hard work and so much time to get here. What if this other new female content creator, new female employee comes in and just like totally jumps right over me and does all the work that I'm doing 10% better? And I just have to catch myself on that point of competitiveness and be like, but no, this is what this space needs.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And it's not always women. There's, it's any underrepresented person, but you don't want to pick up that ladder and be like, cool, I made it in, gonna go focus on what I'm doing. Because that's not how we change the culture. Like, I am not going to change the culture. We change the culture by like setting that wave into motion.
And I constantly remind myself the whole reason that Dirty Driving even started was because there needs to be more people talking about Formula One.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the reason why. So why would I diminish someone who's trying to do the same thing and find their community who is in favor of the content that they create? There's space for everyone. There's, like I said earlier, we're never going to know everything about Formula One. So we need a lot of people talking about Formula One that have their own little niches that talk about the things that they want to talk about, because at the end of the day, we should all want more people to talk Formula One with.
100%.
We should really be trying to take away the fans from soccer. We should try. Why are we alienating?
Say that to me. My sister was a soccer player. That's
I'm kidding.
I could go for like football or maybe baseball.
I'm fine with football. Baseball, whatever. We need, not even hating, but it's so interesting. I'm like, all of us like the same sport. It's not even like it's like F1 versus American football. This is like F1 versus F1. Like, we should be inspiring content, female content, regardless of the sport they're talking about. But we should also be like really inspiring any F1 generated female content, because there really is such a small community now. But think in 3 years, in 3 years, we won't want to look back and be like, well, we should have let those extra F1 content. We should have just welcomed them in 3 years ago.
Now it's us on this little island. That does nothing. That achieves nothing. I would rather anything that I say be copied and diminished because more people said it, to spread the reach further.
We need more people on the island, not less people on the island. Like, we need to bring in, who wants to join the F1 community? Come on in. Let's talk about things instead of pushing people away. I think that is maybe something that more people need to be aware of. Like, let's not alienate those that want to be part of this community, because really this community has grown so much because of Drive to Survive, because of new fans coming into it. The reach that it has now, like, there is no chance that a Vegas Grand Prix or a Miami Grand Prix would have been agreed upon 6 years ago.
The sponsors that are in the sport, the activations that are happening would not have happened if Drive to Survive hadn't brought new advertising dollars and new eyes to the sport. Period. End of story. If you are not, and let's say you're an original fan, you, hand to God, are not a DTS fan, and you enjoy one of those Williams pop-ups that they do in London or outside of a Home Depot in the middle of Austin, you're enjoying that because more eyes were brought to Williams, and now they have Doralton, who probably wouldn't have gotten involved if F1 had not become a more wide-scale advertising arena. Like, you know, DTS is not perfect. DTS fans, as a stereotype, are not perfect, but we can't just ignore the contributions that Drive to Survive has brought. It's useless in doing that. It's trying to erase an impact rather than saying, like, this had a great impact. Here's what we could, like, if you're really worried about the miseducation or the lack of education for DTS fans, try to educate them in a cool, productive way. But don't just be like, I hate DTS fans. They did nothing to this sport. That's wrong. That's a lie.
I mean, like, if you are a true non-new fan to the sport, like, you should probably be thankful, because there are now bars that are willing to open up so that you can watch the race and you no longer have to pay for F1 TV. Like, it's as simple as that. Do you like any of the new, what I would call more modernized merch that's coming out? You like any of that? That would not have happened if there wasn't an influx of new eyes, new dollars, and really just like a burgeoning community, like a community that's welcoming for the most part and wanting more fans.
Yeah. And, you know, we're not going to love every new part of the sport or every change. And we don't have to. Like, do I love that every team is sponsored by a cryptocurrency company? No. Do I think that's kind of dumb? Yeah.
Yes.
But that's a personal belief. I'm not going to be like, cool, crypto hit F1. I hate it now. Like that's just, again, this goes back to what we were talking about of like, you have to have some grace with the sport that you love. Sorry, my saw just got home. Like you have to have grace with the sport that you love and kind of take a step back and recognize like there are going to be changes made so that it survives. And I'm not going to love every change, but if I want to continue to have a sport to watch and to love, then I have to be okay with some changes happening. And of course that's going to mean new people are coming in, but we'll adjust. To me, it's almost the same thing of like at Dartmouth, every time the new class of freshmen come in, there's this like, oh, the class of 2026 is here. Like there's this weird, like turn your nose up to the new class of people. And then by the next year, you're like, yep, they're Dartmouth students. And it's almost this like hazing ritual that is just stupid and shouldn't exist. Like you probably were brought into the sport because a bunch of the neighborhood kids started watching it. And you want me to turn around and be like, boo, I hate the class of 1985 kids who started watching F1. Like it's pointless. And everybody has this new entry point or this point where their sport changes and it brings in new eyes. And if we hate it and act like DTS is its own thing that's never happened before, like you're falling out of love and you're walking away from a sport that you don't need to.
No, you just have to accept that changes will happen and you will adapt.
Mm-hmm.
Humans are adaptable. As much as people like to say humans are not adaptable, we are. Just look at how quickly everyone adopted the internet, smartphones, social media. The fact that we have essentially revolutionized the way we live and our entire existence since the invention of the internet shows that humans are adaptable. So yes, it might take a couple of years. No, all the kinks aren't worked out. Definitely not when it comes to sprint weekends.
Yeah. And like, if you think DTS is the core issue, like if DTS didn't exist, it would have existed by now. If you think that like this social media and the over influence or the over focus on the personal lives of the drivers is like just due to DTS, you are living in a bubble in which you are not recognizing the modern world and the impact of social media. This change is inevitable and you can dislike it, but that doesn't mean that it only happened because of Drive to Survive.
Also, you should probably, be thankful for some of the older generation that it didn't happen sooner. The fact that it was so late is was
so far delayed by Bernie.
Right?
So far delayed
I'm sorry.
by Bernie. And frankly, by Liberty Media. Like I could do a whole podcast on what Liberty Media has done to the sport and media rights. But it was inevitable. It was going to happen. It's now happening for every other sport. And if you look at something like IndyCar or NASCAR that has held itself really closely guarded and not let in something like Drive to Survive, now, about 5 years after DTS started production, they're making their own version because they have to survive and to grow their fan base. Like DTS they didn't start this. It's somewhat of a new format, but the idea of like a sports documentary or more personal coverage of a sport is not new. Motorsports is just now catching up to it, and they recognize that it's good for the fan base, it's good for advertising, it's good for the companies that are sponsoring.
And it really is just bringing a lot of new life into the sport. I mean, I felt
100%.
like there's just so much coming out, like more content, more interactive content. And something that I definitely want to talk about is your latest project in the paddock, the Longest Drive Challenge. So for those of you who did not see any of the videos, I have no idea how you did it. The Shaq video is like one of my favorite videos of Shaq. But Emma was the lead on the project at the US Grand Prix, which was the Longest Drive Challenge. So talk us through what it's like to not just be in the paddock, but be doing your job in the paddock, like the challenges that come along with that.
Yeah. So for some background, I work for a company called Race Service. We are too nebulous to define, but broadly like a motorsports marketing firm. We've worked with ESPN before. So we worked with ESPN to help create kind of their vision of this Longest Drive Challenge, which was done with some PGA and LPGA players. So I should say I wasn't like by any means the lead. I helped the team put it together. I never want to claim ethos that I don't have. But so Race Service, a small crew of us. Originally, we were just going to do content. And then with about 2 weeks notice, we ended up being the one to kind of like physically build this activation. So my personal journey with it is I got involved with the project probably 3 weeks out from Austin. And it just started because they were like, you know, we have to mock up what this could look like. Like, you know, what could an activation look like? And the guy who was doing it at work, like, wasn't a huge F1 fan and definitely didn't know anything about golf. And like, I think if my dad could have one dream for me, it would be that I would work in cars and golf. So I was like, I got this. Like, I know golf. I know F1. Let me help you. And so it started as a sketch, and then it just kept being like, can you find a tent in Austin? Can you do X, Y, and Z? And I was like, I was thirsty to go to Austin. I wanted to go to Austin so bad. And then I kind of had this moment where I was like, why am I not just like telling my boss? Like, why am I not just being like, hey, straight up, I really want to go to Austin. I know that like, it's so to work in the paddock, you have to be credentialed. Most people who work in the paddock will have like a media credentialing, and it's so hard to get. F1 is incredibly protective over media credentialing for good reason. But especially if you're not the team themselves, if you're not ESPN, you can't just be like, hey, we're adding another person. Like, the F1 is like, no, you're not. So I knew that it was a super, super uphill battle to go. I like put it on record with my boss, and I thought that he just had like kind of ignored it. And I was like, okay, heart crushed, but my plan is to work in this industry for the rest of my life. It will come. Like, the time will come when I'm supposed to work here. And then he pulled me out of a meeting like 4 days later. And I was walking with him to this meeting area because he's like, I need to talk to you. And I was like, I'm being fired. I'm being publicly fired at work. Like, what did I do? I'm being fired.
What did I post on TikTok?
Watching. I know. I was like, what did I do? And I was so nervous that he's saying there. He's like, so we want to bring you to Austin. And I just was like, okay.
So I'm not getting fired?
This cool. This yeah, that sounds good. He was like, do you want to go? I was like, that sounds great. Let's go to Austin. And it was this thing of like, I couldn't even get that excited because I was so focused on work. And the week before we went to Austin, we launched Daniel Ricciardo's soonest to be dropped wine blend called Rick Red. So I spent that whole week working with the production staff, getting that party planned. Like meeting Daniel and his team, which was super cool. So I was so focused on Rick Red, and then it was immediate. Okay, go fly to Austin. And most people fly in like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. We got there on Monday, and we went to the circuit for the first time, and there was nobody there. It was me and the two guys who I worked for, and we got there at like, I don't know, 5 p.m. There were no teams there. There were just like their crates of stuff, and that was it. And we drove straight up to our spot in the paddock, and we walked out, and I had this like just crazy feeling in the pit of my stomach of like, oh my God, I made it. Like, it's like this cheesy moment of like, they were like, do you want to see? And they like were totally feeding into it because they've been to a million races. They're like, do you want to go see the pit lane? And I was like, yeah. And we like walked out to the pit lane, and I just was like, I was breathless. I was like, oh my God, like this is. Like, I'm here. And it was so cool to have that moment on Monday of nobody being there and just like being able to walk and get the feeling. But then you get there Tuesday, and it's full steam ahead. So Tuesday, Wednesday for most activations like mine and for the teams are full days. You're setting up the entire day. So, Tuesday we were setting up most of the day. Wednesday we were running errands in the morning. We got there at noon, and we didn't leave until 1 a.m. And like the teams were there with us. Like, we had Mercedes pit crew testing out the golf simulator for us. They were like, we will exchange hits for you doing a garage tour. And my boss, who was like, Emma should do a garage tour, he was like, that is fine. Take Emma into the garage. So it was cool. It was really this inside moment of like, you're watching everything be built around you. You're watching the carousel or the swipe ins be installed. You're watching all this happen. I have like my media pass over there. I got my media pass for the first time, and my boss made me take like a cheesy picture of it next to my face because he was like, in 20 years, you're going to want this photo.
Yeah.
And then you get there Tuesday and it's like a switch has been flipped. It's alive. And there's like, you'll still see teams like building up their paddock, like building up their houses and their hospitality. But it's this very sudden like switch of you're on. Like, there's people everywhere. There's cameras there. It was like the first hour of the day and Pierre and Yuki showed up. And the only way that I knew that is like, obviously a swarm of media comes, but I just heard somebody shout, "Hi, Pierre." And I turned around and was like, cool. Okay. We're starting this. And then like all day was just like drivers in and out of the simulator. But the way that you would know that somebody is coming is there's always media kind of gathered around in the paddock. And there's 3 entry points where you scan in. The point closest to us was the very low profile kind of VIP entry. So Lewis was coming in and out of that entry point. When Max wanted to be low key, he would go in and out of that one. But the media kind of like they swarm like mosquitoes almost to wherever a driver is. So there'd be times when I'd be walking through the paddock and all of a sudden you would see the media converge in front of you. And you'd be like, okay, who's behind me? You turn around and be like, cool, Charles Leclerc. I got to get out of this photo. Like, let me tell you. There was one time I was walking in the morning, like not awake, and all of a sudden the media line up and I was like, what the hell? And so I stop and I turn around and I like physically full speed run into Charles. And I was like, oh my God. And like turned and ran out of the way and was like, there's some goofy photos of me on the internet, I'm sure, of like just totally ruining all these driver entrances. But so throughout the day, Thursday, that's what you would see is you would see the swarm and then you would see everybody move as this giant, there's like 3 rows of media plus they're like PR directors and the drivers swarm into the activation, be there for like 10 minutes, swarm out. And it was so crazy just being there watching. And I think what you realize is when you're in work mode, you don't have the adrenaline of like, I've met a celebrity. You're like,
so focused on
100%.
get in here, participate. Like, what do I need to do?
I kept trying to figure out like what my reaction was going to be. And then it's like, you just can't react. You're so like, one of my jobs was the leaderboard that was photographed with their drives. I was the one like keeping track and writing the distances. So I was so focused at one point trying to figure out what Alex's drive had been. And it was Alex and Nicholas there at the same time. And I was like deranged. I was like, what was Alex's time? Like I was asking everybody, like, what was Alex's longest drive? And Nicholas turned around and it was 288 yards. And I was like, cool, thanks. And I was like, did Nicholas just tell that to me? Like, cool, okay. And then it happened multiple times. Like I would like miss somebody's drive length and like another driver would be like, oh, is this whatever. And that was kind of the point where I was like, oh, this is so much more normal than I thought. Like this is so cool. And like, these are just totally normal people. But that's Thursday. So that's a very incongruous telling of Thursday as media day, which is like, that's what it feels like. It feels like this whirlwind of you're just kind of on call the whole day. And when drivers show up, they show up.
Yeah.
And sometimes you book them and you know what time they're coming and that will always change and nobody will ever be on time. And drivers will be walking by and you'll have to like duck out and try to grab them and bring them in. And then you do that until like 7 or 8 p.m. on Thursday. And then we came back on Friday and Friday was kind of VIP day. It was like, what cool people could we pull in?
Yeah.
We had Will Arnett, better known as Job from Arrested Development, come by. He was there for like an hour every day. My boss and I are huge Arrested Development fans, so we kept being like, it's Job. Like we wanted to write Job on his leaderboard, and we were like, okay, maybe we shouldn't write Job.
Yeah.
But it was like families of the drivers would come through, like Adam Norris, Lando's dad came through, Carmen came through, Tiffany came through, like all of these really cool people. What I didn't realize is when you're working in the paddock like that, there are so few screens in the paddock. There are 1 or 2 in like the media tent, but also when you're doing a media tent area, it's open. It's like an open part of the paddock, but they surround it with security. Mm-hmm. So there's like 10 different types of passes that you can have that get you into the paddock. The only pass that will get you into the like media zone where they're doing the interviews is a media pass or a like team official crew member pass. So there'd be times when like, if you had a VIP pass, you couldn't enter in. Yeah. So there's those occasional moments. but I'm like forgetting even where I was and retelling this crazy story, but it's like in general, it's chaos.
Yeah.
I don't know why I'm totally blanking where I even was.
It sounds like organized chaos. That is like very organized because all the teams
Somebody
are
is
so organized with their time.
You don't know who's like organizing it. You're just like waiting for the invisible organizing force to like tell you what to do. So like sometimes you would like stumble into a media interview. Like there was at one point where my boss, I was like, oh, we were talking about the screens. I was saying that there were screens in the media tent where they were doing interviews. And then there's like one screen in the hospitality, but that's it. So like you can't even watch what's going on. I'm gonna shut my tangential story. It's like one point where I was like organized chaos, just like chilling outside of the Ferrari hospitality, I think, waiting for we were like giving a shirt to Charlotte. I think I was like waiting to give her a shirt. And I was standing there looking stupid. Like I was like half asleep. I'm pretty sure my mouth was open. Like I was just like some stupid face like that. And he texts me and he goes, "You've been on a Canal Plus live stream for the last 3 minutes in the background looking like that." And I was like,
oh my God.
Great. And that happens so many times. Like there's been so many times when I'm in the background in like a stupid photo where I'm like, okay, at least I'm in the video. Like it's
You're
funny.
like, I've made it.
Yeah, there's like a McLaren Unboxed video where you like see my arm and you only see it's my arm because I wore this denim jumpsuit and I got like texts from people on TikTok that were like, "You made it into McLaren Unboxed." And I was like, "What?" And then I watched through it and had to rewind like 5 times and then was like, "Oh, my arm wasn't unboxed. Like, does that count?" But yeah, I mean, it's organized chaos. Friday, it's Saturday. You don't know what's going on. Like there's no screens to watch the race for the most part or watch what's going on. So we'd walk out at the end of the day and be like, how did the practices go? How did qualifying go? And thank God as part of our activation, because my bosses had been to so many races, they knew, they were like, there's no screens in the paddock. We want people to come to this. We're going to get a big ass screen at our activation.
Yeah.
And again, it's one of those, we build it, people will come to it. Mm-hmm. At the end of the race on Sunday, the last 10 laps, our whole team was standing there watching. And a VIP walks in and we look over and Serena Williams just chilled right next to us for the last 10 laps of the race watching it. And it was one of those ones, like there was nowhere else to watch. There was like 50 people outside of the activation. It was our team. There was, I'm pretty sure the Grid Click girls who are amazing were there for part of it. Yeah. Tony was on and off there. Ariana Bravo was on and off there. The presenters were on and off there. But yeah, it was one of those moments where you look over and you're like, even Serena Williams doesn't have a screen to watch this race on. It's not in the garage. So like working in the paddock is great because you have those crazy moments of like, I'm on a live TV broadcast and I had no idea and I'm meeting these cool people and I'm around the drivers. But it really fundamentally is work and you have no idea what's going on at the race that you're at. I would have people text me saying, "Where are you watching the race from?"
You're like, "I'm not."
I was like, haha, I'm not. We got very lucky. We ended up being able to watch like laps 25 to 45, I would say, from Big Red Hospitality. But like that was about it. So the chaotic retelling of the weekend from my perspective is it's how it felt. Like every day you were just like, tell me where to go and what to do. And it would change 50 times throughout the day. And it was the most exhilarating thing that I've ever done. And it was also the most like chaotic and draining thing that I've ever done. But it's so exciting. And like the people that you meet and the people that you become friendly with are so kind. Like I knew Daniel's team a little bit from working on the Rick Red stuff. Mm-hmm. And I would bump into Blake, his manager, or Michael, his trainer. And I must have looked so haggard because every time I bumped into him, they were like, "Are you okay?" Like they would like grab my arm and be like, "How are you doing?" And I'd be like, "I gotta go. Like I have to go do something." And I think one time Michael was like, "It's gonna be okay. Everything is okay." And I walked away and was like, my eyes were watery from allergies, but I was like, he thought I was crying. Like he thought I was having a breakdown, I think.
Oh no.
But they were always so caring about it. Like they'd walk by and check in and be like, "Hey Emma, how's it going?" But that's one of the things too, is like working in the paddock, like people really are friendly. It doesn't matter what team they work for. It doesn't matter what sponsor they're with. Like the familiar faces that are there every day definitely recognize each other, and kind of like the DHL crew would come by and like bring us coffees.
That's so nice.
That really is the vibe of the paddock. When you're
Heartwarming.
working in the paddock is like, it's work and everybody knows that it's really hard work. But they're all super down to do it, and you all have fun doing it. And then the Sunday after the race, we would go out, and it would be like, you'd walk into a bar or a restaurant and be like, every team was there. Every presenter was there. Like, it was this weird, we almost had a moment where we were like, do we want to be with the people that we've been with for the past week straight? Like, do we want to talk about F1 more? But that's why earlier when we spoke about like everything is so much less climatic in person, like that's what it feels like. It's like everybody is really there working for and doing the same thing. We're doing it in a slightly different facet, but at the end of the day, like we're all working on an F1 race to some extent. And that's what it feels like.
And because of that, everyone should be invested in the sport and enjoy the sport and or like the sport or like what they're doing to support the sport. And that is the common. I think that at its core is like the biggest lesson, is that regardless of how you became a fan, regardless of the driver, all the things we've talked about, like we all genuinely do love the sport. And I think that part is the forgotten part, because truly I think fans imagine that the Red Bull drivers walk by the Mercedes drivers and give them middle finger, and the pit crew does the same. But that's just like, that's why it kills me that the video of the Red Bull drivers clapping when Lewis Hamilton crossed the line at the US Grand Prix is like, why is anybody surprised about this? Like, the pit crew knows how hard it is.
Times when they're annoyed, but like it's like you all kind of work for the same higher power, and everybody's pretty chill about it.
And everybody knows how hard everyone is working in the paddock, especially from the story you just told. Is like they're checking on you, because there's probably been a day where they were running around, someone had to look at them and say, it's gonna be okay.
There was like a moment where I don't drink Red Bull, but the crew of guys that we had doing content are huge Red Bull fans. And they were like, Emma, will you just like go by hospitality and try to get Red Bulls? And so I'm like awkwardly standing outside the Red Bull hospitality. I realize that I'm accidentally standing. I'm not even joking, because their tables, like there's a little like waist high kind of fence around the hospitality with like an opening, because it's almost like a little like deck kind of. And then you walk further inside, and that's where the driver's rooms are. The table that was right up against that fence, and therefore was like 6 inches away from my body, just so happened to be where Max and Yost were eating lunch. And so I realized that I'd been like awkwardly lingering by their table, and I was like, cool, great. And then I like walk a step down, and there's like these Red Bull mechanics, and they're like, can we help you? Like, I'm really just trying to get some Red Bull. Like, I'm with ESPN. The guys they just really want Red Bull. And they were like, oh, we'll go get you some from hospitality. And like, same thing with, we would go by Ferrari and get espresso from Ferrari. And so it really is like everybody kind of chips together and works together. I will say, I think one of my favorite moments from the weekend, and it might have been like end of the day after the race or after qualifying, was this moment where I was there, and then the Grid Click girls showed up. 2 girls, 1 formula were there. Lizzie McIntosh was there. Tony Cowan Brown was there. Ariana Bravo was there. And it was just this like, all of these female TikTok creators who I have looked up to for a really long time, like all of us just kind of standing there and having this moment of like, we're all here.
Yeah.
Like we've broken in. Like, we're here. And it was just this really cool synergy moment of like, I think if you had told most of us, 2 years ago that we were going to be standing in the Austin Grand Prix paddock talking about what it was, what our work was like that day, we all would have, laughed and walked away. And it was just this cool gut check moment of like, we're here. Here are all these badass females who are really changing the game all together in one spot. And it was just like this you guys should have been there. It was this meetup that I think it was like impossible to expect was going to happen.
Yeah.
But it's also just so representative of what we felt that entire weekend, which really was like the tides are changing in the sport. And I'm sure you guys felt this. There was so many women there, and there were so many content creators there. And it was just this really cool moment of like, we can feel the modernization as we work here. The people that we are seeing here, the videos that are being made they wouldn't have even been made like a year ago. Like you could feel things changing while we were there.
You could feel things changing. You could sense that there was definitely, and I can't speak because this is the first time we were at COTA, you could feel that they were intentionally planning things there that were more modern, like the permanent jewelry, like the flash tattoos.
Yeah.
Like it feels like they're starting to at least recognize that people come to the race for the race, but there's a lot of time not racing going on that you're not privy to the things that are happening. But they need to create an environment where people can like engage. Yeah. People can talk, like a lot of spaces where, you could just like meet other fans and talk to other fans.
Yeah.
And that's definitely a massive like positive that I caught out of COTA is that everyone we met, especially the young females we met, content creators or just genuine fans there to be fans, is that there was like a buzz, like a hype, like a we're here and we're engaged and we're excited, and really we're excited to share our love of Formula One.
Yeah. And I think there is even like institutionally at the higher level, people like Lizzie, and like that the institutions are pushing and want Lizzie visible on trackside TV. Like that's a very purposeful decision to say like, we want the face of this important programming to be a young female content creator. Even when we were working with ESPN, and they very easily could have said like, the PGA is bigger. We're just going to bring in PGA golf pros. And I remember one of the very first meetings we had about the activation, I was like, why aren't we bringing in Lily Mooney Heat? She's an LPGA golfer. She's Alex's girlfriend, so she'll already be there. She's like a badass golfer. Why aren't we bringing her in? And they were like, oh, cool. Let's connect with the LPGA, and we will always have an LPGA pro there if we're going to have a PGA pro. Like it's that kind of awareness and commitment to visibility that I think we're seeing at some, not all races, but definitely some, that is exciting to be at. I mean, I didn't walk into the race and feel like I shouldn't be there. And that's a huge thing in motorsports, is I walked into that space and I felt accepted. I felt like people weren't really doubting me or looking at my past weird all that much. If they were, I feel like it's because I look like I'm super young, because I am. But I was never like, oh, this is such a male dominated space, I shouldn't be here. It definitely felt like there was this commitment and this visibility to pushing women and pushing other underrepresented groups that are equally important to talk about forward.
I could not agree with that sentiment more. And my hope is that just continues as we move into the remainder of this season. But also, I'm really hoping that even though there's an off season, a lot of content can be created, and a lot of content can be like created that's positive. There can be much more of a push towards that side of things. There's plenty of it. We know tons of people who are doing it, but I definitely think, in my mind, I'm like, the more positive content, the more it'll overshadow that. So I'm like, let's just have like a mountain by the end of like, or the start of the 2023 season, because a new season will come out, and every time a new season comes out, there is like an influx of people. Like this year, I cannot tell you the amount of people that texted me and were like, I'm finally starting it. I was like shocked. I was like, there's people that still haven't seen it. Like,
I'm so excited for everybody to get into watching it again. It really is. It's like we joke about like a freshman class coming into college where there's like mixed reactions, like excitement about the new kids, and then some people being like, boo, we already have what we need. It's almost that same energy to me where it's like, oh, the new kids are going to come soon. Like there's new fans, there's new people who want to learn. The numbers will just keep growing. There's this really great, like, touching on my nerdy statistical side, there's this great study that came out recently that's an analysis of predominantly American sports and how they are performing in terms of viewership over the years. And it's a chart from like the 1980s to the modern year, and it charts like every American league you can think of: the MLB, the MLS, NFL, NBA, NHL, NASCAR, Indy, WWE, F1. And there are a lot of, older institutionalized sports that are trending downwards. And F1 is only
It's
going
just, like,
up.
growing.
And I really
Only
do
going
think
up.
that's the energy there.
I love that. I'm constantly hoping for new fans because I love it. I love when one of my friends or family members or even acquaintances sends me a message like, hey, I know about the podcast. I just started watching this. I don't really understand what like, can you tell me the difference between like a VSC and a safety car? And I'm like, yes, please, let's talk about it. And they're like, so like, I don't really get the whole, like, why is like this person subbing out for this person? I'm like, okay, let's talk about it. Like, and I love how they ask the questions. They're like, I'm not really sure. Like, don't just ask the question. Don't.
It's the same thing when you preface like, this is a dumb question. It's like, no
just
preface.
ask the question.
Just ask the question. Like, we've all thought that same question. So just ask it.
Yeah. At one point, we didn't know the answer to that question. So we've done our research.
Yeah.
We're happy to share our education and our knowledge so that then you can go on and educate the next person who says, what's the difference between a virtual safety car and a safety car? Well, I know, and I'd be happy to share that with you because that's increasing the listenership, that's increasing the watchership, that's increasing the fans who are there to learn more about the sport and be good fans of the sport.
Exactly.
Well, we could go on about this for hours, but we have definitely have been so excited to have this awesome conversation with you, Emma. And we're so happy to like call you one of our F1 friends. I definitely, I like
100%.
I talk about that all the time. I'm like, I told somebody, I was like, oh, I have an interview with one of my new F1 fans, F1 friends. And they were like,
also a fan. No, let's be clear. Also a fan of the podcast.
Thank you.
But no, I'm like, yeah, she's like one of my F1 friends. Like I met her via F1 and she's going to do an interview. And they're like, isn't she just a friend? I was like, yeah, but she's like really special because she's an F1 friend. They thought I was so weird. But no, we are so appreciative of it. We're going to have you back. Maybe we'll do like a Drive to Survive recap and you can join and we can just like chat about season 5.
Season 5.
I saw some clips being filmed in Austin and I feel like it's pretty good.
Okay, well, we might have you back for that. But before we let you go, Emma, please let everyone know where they can find you, where they can find your blog, your TikTok, your Instagram, whatever you want to share.
Yeah, so I'm most active. So on TikTok, it's at the Formula One Nation. And then my Instagram is just my personal name. So at emma.elsbecker. Instagram is definitely more day-to-day content. I post from race service, so cool cars in addition to just F1 stuff. And then my TikTok is definitely more built out videos, things like that. But you can definitely find me on either one of those. I always want to talk with new people, get to know more F1 fans. So hopefully I can connect with more people on there.
Well, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for sharing all the things that you've shared with us and our listeners. And we can't wait to continue the conversation.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
Well, stay tuned, listeners, for a future episode for our next guest. But until then, stay dirty. Thank you so much for listening to another episode. Don't forget to subscribe and follow us at Dirty Driving Pod on Twitter and Instagram.
Until next time, stay dirty.